streaming option is I can go back and I can watch myself and I can see what I did wrong, and which is both nice but not nice at the same time. So, who can tell me what we talked about last week? Science. 10 points for Aaron. What about science, Aaron?
The law of science.
Okay.
Like Boyle's law, Charles' law, the law of physics, math, and how that they can only work one way, not the other way.
They can only work one way. Absolutely. Yeah. Just to give you a quick recap, because I don't think I explained some of these things super clearly. Like, the reason we're not using the Bible in this class is if you don't believe in the Bible, then it's going to be really hard to convince someone that God exists just by using the Bible. It's a circular reasoning problem. You know, you could say, well, like, why is Rachel popular? Well, she's popular because everyone likes her. Okay, why does everyone like her? Well, she's popular, and you just keep going in these loops. Well, why does God exist? Well, God exists because his book says so. Well, I mean, you keep going in these circular logic problems that scientists sometimes try to use on us, but we have to you have to find external evidence for something that you're trying to believe in. And so, you know, say you come across a colleague and the colleague is, well, I believe in a higher power. You know, I'm spiritual, whatever that means. But, you know, I don't really know if I believe in God. I don't really know if I believe in, you know, the church. So, like, you have to find something that's a common ground to start with. And this is one option that you can use if you've got someone that you want to share the Bible with who thinks they might believe in God, but is just not super convinced, or they're just kind of waffling between a couple different options. And so we're going to try and find God from scratch using all the clues that he's left over for us. Okay? So, these are some of the sources that I've used for compiling this lesson, amongst others. The title of the lesson, The Case for the Creator, is shamelessly stolen from Lee Strobel in his book. That's the one that I first started reading that kind of led me down this path, and then I started, you know, reading a whole bunch of other things. If you're wanting, you know, a book to look at, that is a great first option. Another one that I've used extensively is Stephen Meyer. He's got 3 books out, and he is a super genius in the way that he can look through all of these things. I really highly recommend Stephen Meyer's books. He's got The Return of the God Hypothesis. He's got The Signature in the Cell, which we're going to use some of his stuff later when we start talking about microbiology. And then another really good one that's really accessible is God's Crime Scene. It was written by a former detective who kind of used some of his experiences with law enforcement to explain how, like, we're looking at the crime scene from God's creation. There's pieces of things that are left over from everything that God's done. And so if you're looking for a book that you want to learn more about this stuff, that's an awesome good option. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to do a quick recap from last week, and then we'll go back into it. There's 3 options for how the universe got here. Option 1, the universe spontaneously created itself, or it came out of nothing. It's 2 versions of the same argument, okay? Option number 2, the universe has always been here forever. Or option number 3, the universe was created by something else or someone else, okay? If you Google these, like if you Google how did the universe get here, most of the time you'll get 1 or 2 versions of the first or the second option. They like the, it created itself option a lot. And Google also will just say that it's always been here forever. Although that one is waning in popularity with Google because it's just less tenable these days with the amount of science that we've learned. All right. So the universe came out of nothing. So last week we looked at the laws of thermodynamics. We looked at the first law, which helps us think through this option, okay? It says energy cannot be created or destroyed, okay? It says the energy in a closed system is always constant, okay? So if the first law of thermodynamics does not work, you have all sorts of problems. Who in here is a chemistry teacher or has? Okay, George. What happens if your chemical equations don't equalize? Something's wrong. Why is something wrong?
Because they all balance out.
They don't balance out. Okay.
Have an equation, you got to balance it.
Which pieces of the chemical equation have to balance?
Both sides.
Well, yeah, both sides. They have to balance in terms of matter and energy. Exactly. They both have to balance in turn. You have the mass on the same sides has to be equal, right? And the energy on both sides has to be equal. And that is directly because of the first law of thermodynamics. So I looked at a thing on the internet this week, and it said, I typed in, what happens if your chemical equations don't balance? And this guy on a forum said, your teachers snicker and they start deducting points from your answers. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Because they're going to balance out some way or another. You can't have an imbalanced equation like that. It will find a way and it will equalize, and it just won't have the results you're looking for.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, they said that's the other thing that will happen is like if you try to do a reaction and you don't have a balanced equation, like it will find a way to balance itself out, but there may be a catastrophic scientific explosion if you didn't measure everything right. You're going to get a much bigger reaction than what you thought you were going to get. If the first law of thermodynamics doesn't work, chemistry doesn't work. So, I've listed a couple things on here. If chemistry doesn't work, we can't digest food. If chemistry doesn't work, photosynthesis doesn't work. If chemistry doesn't work, we can't have medicines, you can't make a fire, you can't have soap or sunscreen or toothpaste or batteries. Chemistry is a fundamental part of the universe and how it works. And if the first law doesn't hold, then none of those things work anymore. All right? So if you have that, it means the universe could not have created itself. If we can't create matter, if we can't destroy matter, there's nothing else in the universe that points to an option for having the universe created itself or it appearing out of nothing. All right? All right. Step 2, it's always been here. Who remembers why it can't have always been here? See step 1? No, step 2 is different. Things are slowing down. Why are they slowing down? It's getting older. Okay. If it was always been here, it would always stay the same. That's right. Yeah. Anyone else? The fact that it's winding down indicates it has a starting point. If we're going from these, there's a certain amount of energy that exists in the universe. And if the universe is taking that energy and it's moving it from these really condensed spaces and it's dispersing it, it's going from what they call high energy states to low energy states, then At some point, there's going to be just no more high energy left over, and you're just going to be left with something that's almost completely unusable. Is that right? So, if you can't have started with an infinite amount of energy, okay? And if the energy in the universe is slowly bleeding away, we're slowly going from high energy states to low energy states. That means at some point we're going to get to a point in the world where there's going to be nothing that we can do with it at that point. So that means the universe cannot have existed forever. All of the energy is moving from more dense states to less dense states. Everything's moving from super hot locations, and it's getting dispersed. And we talked about the car yesterday, and all the problems that would, or not yesterday, last week, that all the problems that would happen if energy didn't flow that way. We talked about how you would have these really weird situations where, if something started generating heat and the second law didn't hold, it would actually, the heat from the other locations would swirl and come around it. Can we turn this down just a smidgen, Darren? Or guys, can we turn my mic down just a smidgen? Or do I do that? Okay, thank you. So, if you have a car and it's trying to use up energy and it's making heat, then you get these weird things where if the second law doesn't hold, where the heat just gets dispersed throughout the radiators and all the systems that try and keep it cold, the heat actually swarms the locations that are actually already hot. Okay? So think about if you're hot in this alternate world, okay, like you're overheating yourself, how do you cool off? No, that's actually the opposite of what you have to do. In this weird alternate universe where energy doesn't disperse itself, you actually have to find a hotter source and you have to get next to it, and the energy from you will start going to the hotter source, and then you will cool off. Okay? And then how do you warm up in this weird alternate universe? Huh? Move away. Yeah, you have to start generating your own heat somehow. It's a really weird situation to think like you would go to in this world where it doesn't move from hot to cold, it goes from cold to hot. If you built a campfire, that would actually make you more cold because it would become this incredibly intense heat source, and it would start sucking all the heat away from other things around it. And so you got next to it, it would actually take all the heat out of you at the same time. It wouldn't give you heat, it would take it away. It's a really bonkers thing to think about, but it doesn't work that way, thank goodness. All right. So, step one, conclusion from thermodynamics. Something. Oh, you got a question? Go for it.
Yes, I just wanted to say that this alternate universe couldn't exist because everything goes into continuous convergence. Because you're constantly trying to find a flux of energy, and that's how we get electricity. It's constant movement.
Right.
If we can't move, we can't. If you're saying there's an alternate universe that would have some kind of heat transfer where we still go somewhere hotter, but we still innately can't do that transfer, that can't exist because then we can't have energy. And then if we can't have energy, then how can we live?
Yeah. Like, when you try to think about this alternate world, there's a lot of problems that you run into really quickly. Like, the energy transfer problem is a big problem. The other problem is, like, all of the energy in the universe would condense into a single spot. It would all condense into a single spot eventually. So it's a really weird thing to think about. It takes a while to wrap your head around it. All right. So, from the laws of physics, We know that something bigger and more powerful than the universe came and caused it to come into existence. Okay? Okay. Then we talked about math last week. Who can tell me the math problem that we ran into? We talked about the infinity problem. We talked about marbles. Could anyone tell me the marble problem? Roger, help me out.
If I have an infinite number of marbles and give away half of the marbles I have, I still have an infinite number of marbles, and so do you.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So you can subtract an infinite amount of marbles, and you're still left with an infinite amount of marbles. You can subtract an infinite amount of marbles, and you can be left with any number that you like. You can have 4 marbles left, 5 marbles left, 1,000,000 marbles left. Or you can take an infinite amount of marbles, and you can subtract all of them, and you can be left with 0, okay? And then we talked about how you can take marbles out of this option, and you can just replace it with years, okay? You can say, I want to start at the beginning of the universe, this infinite universe that has lived forever, supposedly, and I'm going to subtract 1,000,000 years, and you're still left in the infinite past. Or I'm going to subtract 13.9 billion years, which is the magic number that they say for the amount of time that we've, existed. And do what?
This month.
Yes, for sure.
This month it'll be different.
It will get refined, as they say, and change a little bit next month. And then you're still left in the infinite past. If the universe has always been here, there's no date that you can ever put inside the time machine that gets you back to the beginning of the world. We don't know when the universe was created. But we do know, because nothing else works otherwise, that there was an exact time frame, there's an exact day, an exact hour that we could type in. Yes?
It's actually a problem physics is starting to discover, is because the particles are constantly being broken down, and now we have a particle that's been discovered a few years ago, called the Higgs Bosom and the Higgs field. And so, but that still doesn't explain the infinity of time in essence. And it's funny because talking about time, it's honestly all about carbon dating. And carbon dating with the half-life of these isotopes, it's what we think it is. But technically, carbon dating justifies sedimentary rock layers, justifies fossils, justifies the flood, justifies everything, but it's just how we interpret what we think it is, and that's why all these billions and millions of years comes from, is because we think the half-life of these isotopes are what they are, but we technically don't know, if that makes sense.
We don't know exactly what the half-lives are? That's the issue?
The issue is that we're misinterpreting the half-lives of these isotopes, and that's the whole purpose, the basis and foundation of the year estimation of the Earth and the universe. Well, of the Earth, I should say.
Okay, that's interesting.
It assumes a constant, that's always in effect, that these particles break down at a certain rate, and it assumes that nothing has happened since then. There's been no catastrophic event, flood. There's been nothing that has happened. It has always decayed at the same rate. There's a lot of assumptions there that they dare not answer, which is why carbon dating is so flawed.
So if you have a non-constant decay rate, so if
it assumes a constant that these decay at the same rate all the time.
Okay.
Without any outside influence. Sorry.
Okay. All right. And then the last thing we started talking about last week is we started talking about the scientific reasoning versus the personal reasoning of the beginning of a universe, okay? So they like to explain things in terms of initial conditions and natural laws, okay? You know, we talked about last week, if everything is set up for an infinite past, so if we walk into this room, okay, and we've got this really neat contraption set up where it's going to do all the dominoes. So someone has taken the time and they've set up, 1,000 dominoes, and if you push one, it's going to make this really cool pattern on the floor, okay? If you walk into the room, the dominoes are always going to be set up until something takes an action and moves it, okay? You can also think about this in terms of initial conditions. Well, the scientists will like to tell you, well, there was a bunch of mass, there was a bunch of matter, it was all concentrated in a single point, and then the Big Bang theory happened. Okay, well, why did that happen? Well, that's the same thing as the dominoes. You're saying all the dominoes are set up and they're all ready to go, but something still has to come along and something still has to push it. You can't say that the initial conditions themselves are responsible for the starting event that makes it happen, okay? The dominoes themselves are not responsible for someone starting the chain reaction. Because if that's the case, then it would have happened a long time ago. Like you're confusing, like when they do that, they say they're confusing the effect coexists with the cause, okay? So if, another example we talked about last week, we said, if it's below 32 degrees and you have a thing of water, it's going to be frozen. And if that is the condition, it is always met. You can't say it's below 32 degrees and I have a pot of water, but it's not frozen. That just doesn't exist. You would say, because it just doesn't work. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, that's a kind of a lame example. But does the domino example kind of make sense? Like you can't have everything set up and then say the setup of the dominoes is the thing that causes it to work. You can't say, well, the universe was set up ready to go and therefore it just happened. Like you can't have something that coexists with its own cause. Something else has to cause the universe to change from one state to another. And if you're thinking about something that is big enough to cause a universe to move from one state to another to start this great chain reaction, sure. Yes, ma'am.
It's like Newton's ladder. I mean, gravity would not exist because you can't have gravity is the change of motion. It's acceleration down to the core of the earth. So you can't have gravity. If we don't have gravity, you can't have the moon. Don't have the moon, we can't have tides. It's just if you're this infinite energy is such a problem because then we would just be floating into the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about the gravity problem and no, that's great. I love all this stuff. Yes, Roger.
The recent science that I've been reading, I follow this James Webb Space Telescope group on Facebook, and a lot of that is atheistic, scientific, trying to disprove God kind of theories. And a couple of things came out of that. I hope I can remember both of them now. The one is, how big was the initial Big Bang if there was a Big Bang? They say that all matter and energy that ever existed came together at one single point. Well, how big was the single point? Was it as big as my fist? Was it the size of a pin? Was it the size of a baseball? Was it 8 billion light years across? How big was the single point? And the answer to that comes down to, well, then how big is God? To have made something that big and be outside it, and we still haven't reached the edges. The other thing is they've started to look at how our universe, our galaxy works in relationship to other galaxies. And it's repeatable. The phenomenon that is a galaxy, that is the creation or formation of planets and extraterrestrial bodies, is repeatable. They're starting to see the same gravity that holds our galaxy together, holds together a galaxy 1 billion light years away.
For sure.
Or 13.8 billion light years away. Anyway, the fact that it's seen all across the universe is what makes it a universe, that everything works the same no matter where you go.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to work the exact same way. The funny thing is like, so the current estimates for the amount of time that has passed is 13.8.9 billion years. The current estimates for the size of the universe in terms of light years across is in the 90 billion range. So the universe is that right? Does that sound reasonable? Okay.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. This is an interesting topic, by the way. I wanted to point out too is that if you have a convergence like you mentioned before, you'd have to have a horizon event. You can't really have a horizon event because technically the flow of motion in a sense. So with infinity of infinity, that still can't really happen.
Yeah. With the if you have 13.8 billion years, okay, that we've existed, and you have your universe that's 90 billion years across, the weird thing is you have constants that exist across all 90 billion years. And so what they're saying is this part of the universe can't have talked or can't have been in contact with this part of the universe unless there was a point where they were all really close together. And so they worked themselves into new theories to try and explain how that happens. We'll go over that in a minute because it is kind of interesting. All right, so what about God? Why is God exempt? We just said that, the first and second laws of thermodynamics prevent energy from being created or destroyed, and they also prevent something from existing forever. So the atheist David Brooks says, what about God? Why is he exempt? Why is God exempt?
I've been vaguely going through the apologetics Bible that Caleb contributed to it, some of the writings, not the Bible, the writing of the Bible. And it brought out, the one thing I do remember, and I am not a science person, but those laws deal with nature.
Sure.
They are natural laws, and what I got out of it is God is not, he is supernatural. So there's a distinction there. And we cannot bind natural laws on a supernatural being.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have been using two terms for the last 2 weeks, and I think they need to both be discussed in detail. The law of thermodynamics, and I'll emphasize the word law. And a number of times we have talked about how the earth came like it was when we use the word theory. There is a wide difference between those two. And they often get mixed up. Many people talk about something as a law when it is just a theory.
Sure.
A law is something that can be proven and is proven. A theory is not.
Yeah. So why is God exempt?
They're pointing out the one major fact of God, basically. They're pointing out how he can't be governed, he can't be explained his beginning. His beginning cannot be explained.
For sure.
His existence cannot really be explained. It's there. He's just there. It's like he materialized out of nowhere, and that doesn't happen with what we can imagine. I mean, God even said it himself. He created time to bind us in it.
Right.
He created all these things to bind us to it. I mean, after Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, or were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, he guarded the tree of life. He put them to work. He caused these things to occur. After their generation, he limited the time of human life existence on earth. We no longer live up to 1,000 years. We live hopefully 100 years, probably less. Like we are bound by physical measures.
For sure.
Everything that we are quantifying is our prison.
Yeah, yeah. We exist in his world.
Lance? Oh. It's difficult for our finite minds to comprehend the infinite. Because like you say, that you have think of a number, then add one. It's ad infinitum. It can go on forever. So it's difficult, like to springboard off what those two ladies said, for us to bind on the supernatural what we, the natural, live with and comprehend every day. So it's difficult, like I say, for us to understand how infinity works. Like, to explain time is like a vapor, right? We spend 100 years and we think that's an inordinate amount of time for us at our age, but that's just a mere vapor. It's like taking a marble or a rock and it degrading over time with water and wind and nature and erosion, and that lasts for tens of thousands of years possibly. And so it's just difficult for us to comprehend the infinite and the supernatural.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
can't understand those laws.
Yeah. Chris?
So circling back to the question there, without the Bible, he's exactly right.
Yeah, without the Bible.
Because
he
you
is
have
right.
you have two different types of revelation that we're all aware of. You have general revelation and special revelation. General revelation, what we see around the world. We can around the world, around the universe, we see that there is a creator. There was a beginning. And that draws us to the special revelation, which is the communication from God, the Bible. Without the Bible, it's no different. It's like, well, you think that everything originated here. I think that everything originated here. No one's going to win that argument.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there's a special revelation from God that is that's infallible, and that is, that's where all of the discussion should inevitably take us. Just like Paul did on Mars Hill with the Romans and the Gentiles. He brought it down to their level. He talked to them and said, I can see that that there is a God out here, and you're trying to make sure to cover your bases. He brought it down to their level, and then he introduced Jesus. He introduced the Scripture and brought it up to him, and that's what we need to do. That's the practical. Sure, be aware, but how are you going to bring it back to Christ? The
Yes.
special revelation.
Yeah, we'll have to circle back on that one. Yes.
What we started off with was the closed system, and all of these laws explain this closed system that
Right.
God is not inside of.
God is not
God is
inside it.
outside of that closed system. So whatever things he has, the things of God are of God, he doesn't go by our laws. So the cause is based in a closed system.
Right.
He's not within that closed system.
Exactly.
So we don't need to have a cause or an explanation of where he came from. He's been there. He's outside of this system. We can't define him based on our definitions.
Right. So imagine that you created a machine, okay? And you put the machine in a room, and this machine is sitting there, and let's say it's making toys all day long, okay? From the point of the view of the machine, it's thinking like this is all there is, and like it's going to just sit there and generate the toys that it was created to do. And then if it like, if the machine was to think about it, the machine would be like, oh, well, there was a creator, Lance set up this machine for me, and this or set me up in this thing, and now I create toys. The machine is the closed system. It operates from whatever laws, whatever rules we apply to the machine. But we can step back, and I am not affected by the machine that I've created. I can tell the machine to do something else. I can tweak it. I can add more materials to it. But I am not bound by the machine that I've created. The machine I've created is bound by whatever rules I've set up for. Think about it that way. God has set up this world, and he is not bound by any of the things that he's injected into it. Yes, sir.
The problem we have is determining the age of things and the distance of things. When God created things instantaneously, for instance, Adam and Eve were created as full-grown human beings. Now, we might come along and see them, if we were able to, as mature individuals, but they weren't. They may have just been a few days old. The trees that God created, did they have rings at that time? They were full grown. I don't know, but I know that we can't age it. We can't figure that out by looking at the trees, nor can we figure out distances, because instantaneously God created the planets. And the light came instantaneously to the eyes of human beings in that first week of creation.
Yeah.
So we have a real time trying to figure these things out.
Yeah, that's another good point. Like, if you're looking at whatever the perceived age of an item is versus its actual age, those two things can be very different. Like he said, God didn't create Adam, as a baby. He created him as a full-grown man who looks like what we would assume a full-grown man was, but was minutes old at that point, So his actual age, what we would call his age, is minutes. His physical age was 30 years or whatever age he was created at. And those are two very different things. And if he can do the same thing with Adam, he can do the exact same thing with the age of the universe. He can make everything look like it's existed for a lot longer than it has. Yeah. If you're going back, and you're looking at, a cause of space and time, it has to be something that's outside the system. It has to be beginningless, timeless, spaceless, not affected by the world it's created, and something with freedom to create the machine the way that he wants it to be done, and enormous power in order to inject it. And that is the very core concept of what God looks like. All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate y'all's comments.